a faint curl of smoke rising from a bundle wrapped tight against the wind. Today, fire is a flick of a lighter away. For most of human history, that single flick simply didn't exist as an option. Archaeologists Francesco Berna and Paul Goldberg spent years analysing sediment inside Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, layer by layer, under conditions careful enough to rule out lightning strikes or wildfire ash blowing in from outside. What they found pushed the human relationship with fire back further than almost anyone expected. Burned bone and ashed plant remains dated to roughly 1 million years old, the earliest secure evidence of controlled fire anywhere on the planet. Something walking on two legs, long before modern humans existed, was already using fire deliberately, deep inside a cave, far from where any natural blaze could have reached on its own. So why does this story involve carrying embers at all, instead of just lighting a new fire whenever one was needed? Because controlling fire and creating fire from nothing turn out to be two completely different skills, separated by an enormous stretch of time. Researchers Will Roebroeks and Paul Villa reviewed fire evidence across Europe and found something striking. Reliable, everyday fire use doesn't become common in the archaeological record until somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 years ago, hundreds of thousands of years after Wonderwerk's earliest embers. For all that time in between, the ability to use fire seems to have run well ahead of the ability to summon it on demand. If your fire went out in open country with no friction technique you trusted and no flint sharp enough to spark reliably, you didn't start over. You simply didn't have fire anymore, for as long as it took to find someone who did, or stumble across a lightning strike still smouldering somewhere on the horizon. Picture what that actually meant during a long migration. You're moving with your group across open, exposed ground, and the only flame for 100 miles in any direction is the one you're personally responsible for keeping alive. Wind is the enemy. Rain is worse. Too much air and the whole bundle catches and burns out in minutes. Wasted. Too little, and it quietly suffocates without anyone noticing until it's already cold. So the fire travels small, wrapped tight, smouldering instead of burning, tucked inside something insulated enough to choke off just enough air to slow it down without ever quite letting it die. Someone checks it every few hours, the way you'd check a phone battery, except the cost of forgetting isn't a dead phone. It's the whole group sleeping cold, eaten raw, and starting completely from zero. You don't have to guess what that container looked like. In the 1990s, hikers found a 5,300-year-old man preserved in ice in the Alps, now known as Ötzi. Among his belongings, a container made of birch bark, packed with maple leaves wrapped tightly around fragments of charcoal, plus a separate piece of processed tinder fungus, a material that catches a spark and then smoulders for hours instead of flaring up and burning out. That's not a random assortment of plant matter. That's a complete, deliberately engineered ember-transport kit, carried by someone who understood exactly how long he might need to keep a single coal alive before he saw fire again. This wasn't unique to one man in one mountain pass. European explorers recorded Aboriginal Tasmanians habitually carrying smouldering fire sticks with them as they moved across the island, switching them out for fresh ones at the next camp, rather than ever letting the original flame fully die. For decades, the standard explanation was blunt. They simply couldn't make fire from scratch, so carrying it was their only option. That explanation has been challenged since by researchers like Gisela Volger, who pointed to circumstantial evidence that percussion fire starting may have existed there too. Nobody has fully settled the argument either way, and probably never will from historical records alone. What both sides agree on is the part that matters most here. Carrying embers wasn't a backup plan for these communities. It was the default, trusted method used constantly, regardless of whether starting fresh was technically possible at all. Even in Western Australia, ethnographers recorded women travelling with dried fungus and small seed cones tucked into bags specifically to help coax a carried ember back into a usable flame at the next stop. That reframes the whole picture. This wasn't primitive people failing to invent a lighter. It was a technology in its own right, refined over a staggering span of time, optimised for exactly one job: making sure a single source of warmth, safety, and cooked food never had to be reinvented from nothing in the middle of nowhere. You will probably never once in your life need to keep something smouldering for days so your family doesn't freeze. A pocket lighter, a stove igniter, a match struck against any rough surface. Any one of them ends the entire problem in under a second. A problem that used to require constant attention, careful wrapping, and exactly the right amount of suffocating airflow to keep a coal alive without consuming it. So the next time a flame appears at the press of a button, picture the version of this that took 1,000,000 years to even begin, and hundreds of thousands more before anyone could end the question of fire by striking it themselves.